This briefing will come to order. As the members here know, we're not going to be able to formally organize until next week, but I very much appreciate the ranking member, Mr. Engel, his cooperation in beginning this process of holding today a briefing so that we can get started on the many pressing issues that we face. And I look forward to meeting next week to formally organize the committee and discuss how all of us can work together in a bipartisan way in order to advance U.S. interests around the world. And one of the things I've enjoyed about working with this committee is the way Mr. Engel and myself and the members here on the committee have been able to advance the idea that we work on a consensus and then move that forward with one voice overseas. And I think that amplifies the message from the United States. But the issue that we're discussing today, North Korea, is one where for years the United States and our allies have been rightly concerned about the threat from North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. Mr. Sherman and myself remember very vividly the situation of proliferation by North Korea with respect to the transfer of that capability into Syria and on the banks of the Euphrates, a weapons program being developed there as a consequence of North Korea. And for years, we've watched that program grow, and now this brutal regime has added a new weapon to its arsenal, which is cyber attacks. And the state-sanctioned cyber attack on Sony Pictures underscored three unchanging facts about North Korea. First, this rogue regime has no interest in being a responsible state. Second, while Kim Jong-un continues to carry out human rights abuses around the world, and by carrying out attacks, for those of you who remember some of the exercises that the North Koreans have taken offshore, as well, most importantly, of what they've done to their own people. The way in which a country treats its own people will sometimes tell us how they'll treat others. The current president of South Korea, her mother, was assassinated by North Korean agents. So we looked at that UN report that was recently filed after the evidence and interviews with many of the survivors, defectors out of North Korea. This was the conclusion of the report. The United Nations has found no parallel in the contemporary world for the treatment of people in North Korea. That's quite a statement. And in the meantime, of course, instead of assisting that population, the resources that North Korea gets its hands on continues to go into its nuclear and missile systems, and of course, cyber weapon capability as well. And third, the third point, North Korea's weapons are not merely for show. We and our allies in Northeast Asia are facing a brutal and dangerous regime, one that not only is trying to miniaturize nuclear weapons to put them on ICBMs, but also one, as I said earlier, that has been involved in the past in Central Asia and in the Middle East in proliferating these weapons, different types of weapons, missiles and other types of offensive capability, as well as nuclear weapons capability. So North Korea's growing cyber capability emerged most starkly in 2013. Our ally South Korea suffered a series of cyber attacks that temporarily brought down some of the commercial and media networks. It disrupted banking systems. The hackers called this dark soul, but in particular what they were able to do was to shut down the banking systems in parts of the country, shut down the ATM systems, and so forth. Despite limited Internet capability in North Korea, the fact is that there is an elite cyber warfare unit that defectors have told us about, Bureau 121, which was traced back as the source of these attacks on South Korea. And some of the expertise was obtained overseas by sending them to other countries for training, but Certainly that capability was deployed against South Korea, and last year's cyber attack is estimated to have cost Sony hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. It was a state-sanctioned attack that has many Americans asking, if that is what North Korea can do to a movie company, how vulnerable is our critical infrastructure? How vulnerable is our electric grid? You know, what if electricity was cut off? I mean, that obviously could be a dark chapter. Earlier this month, the administration announced long overdue sanctions targeting officials and front companies of the North Korean government, and I'm glad the administration has described this as just the first aspect of its response, because many of those North Koreans blacklisted, many of those individuals who were blacklisted had already been targeted by U.S. sanctions. But the significance of this new executive order may come from the broad power it gives the President to target anyone who is a part of the North Korean government or is assisting them in any way. That is, if the administration chooses to use it to its full advantage. We need to step up and target those financial institutions in Asia and beyond that are supporting the brutal and dangerous North Korean regime. Such sanctions have crippled North Korea in the past. For those of us who remember the consequences on Banco Delta Asia being sanctioned and left the regime unable to buy the loyalties of its generals at that time who could not be paid. This committee has been focused on the North Korea threat for years, bringing attention to the regime's human rights abuses, its illicit criminal activities, its growing nuclear and missile programs, and helpful scrutiny of North Korean nuclear negotiations. Indeed, last Congress, the House passed legislation that Ranking Member Elliot Engel and I authored to ramp up the financial pressure on North Korea, pressing for North Korea to be designated a primary money laundering concern, as has been done with Iran, curtailing its sale of weapons and stepping up inspections of North Korean ships, among other steps. Unfortunately, the Senate failed to act on this critical legislation before it adjourned, but we'll soon try again and give the Senate a chance to join us in tackling this growing threat. And I'll now turn to the Ranking Member for his opening comments.